Welcome to the Let Life Begin podcast, a teaching ministry of Dr. Philip Dunn, Senior Pastor of First Mount Juliet Church. In this podcast, Dr. Dunn will share biblical principles with real-life application. Thank you for listening today.
Welcome to the Let Life Begin podcast, and thank you so much for joining us. And this week we're going to be reading the rest of 1 Samuel, and then alongside of 1 Chronicles 10, and then several Psalms. And I'd like to explain a little bit of that as we just kind of get a grasp up on the Word this week. But I kind of covered at the end of last week's episode the rest or the close of 1 Samuel, but maybe I can backtrack a little bit to just give you a highlight, because there's so much insight, spiritual insight into just David's life as he fled from Saul. And so I want to back up and say a couple things. As you read through 1 Samuel, I mentioned to you that you have the personalities of Samuel, and then Saul, and then David. Well, long before Saul had abdicated the throne, God's hand was already off of him. And long before David ever became king, God had already anointed him to be king. And there's something to be said there about God's timing, because I think so often we're waiting on the Lord, and I know it's like one of the great struggles of the Christian life, like the timing of God, when He decides to do what He does, in the ways that He decides to do it. And yet we find in David, he's waiting upon the Lord. Could you imagine that although he's anointed king, he's not taunting, he's just patiently waiting upon God, but worst case, he's like fleeing for his life. And the great king for whom he avoids taking retribution against twice is very set on taking his life. There's a few Psalms here that come to life that maybe I can connect for us this week that are beautiful. We'll read Psalm 7, Psalm 27, Psalm 31, Psalm 34, Psalm 52. And I think when we get the story and we relate it to what's happening in 1 Samuel, and then later on 2 Samuel and some of the Psalms that he wrote, it helps us to humanize David. And the book of Psalms, just to say something about that for a moment, is a great book of human emotion. I mean, if you want to know the raw and the real of just life at its worst and at its best, and with all the great questions and the doubts that we have, you can read the book of Psalms. It's a gift of God to us. Well, it come by and large through the pen of a man whose heart had bled, and he knew what it was like to be in fear. He knew what it was like to wonder, Lord, who's for me, and to many times be humiliated. David experienced the great depths of human despair. Well, I go back to 1 Samuel chapter 21 when he is at Gath, and the Bible says he was on the flee, on the run again from Saul. And it's an amazing thing, because as he is there, just quickly, the Bible says that day David fled from Saul, went to Achish, king of Gath. But the servants of Achish said to him, Is this David? Isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the one they sing about in their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. Now remember, when they first said that about David and Saul heard it, it began a whole life then that was filled with jealousy. Saul was very jealous of David. And David took these words to heart, and he was very much afraid of Achish, king of Gath. I'm glad that that's there, because here's the great king of Israel who dealt with fear. We see this at every turn with the people that God has used for his kingdom. And so, fear is a real powerful motivator in all of our lives. I saw an interview one time with a great leader, and he's done a lot. I mean, he's sold many books. He's a great preacher, a great pastor, a great church, a huge platform, social media following. And anyway, somebody had asked him, like, well, do you ever have any fears? And surprisingly, he said yes. He said, but fear is in my passenger seat. I don't let fear my driver's seat. And I thought that was so insightful, because I think that for many of us, we deal with fear, but most of our spiritual life is not moving forward in the absence of fear. It's moving forward in the power of God, the presence of God, and in spite of our fears. Well, here's David. He's fearful. And maybe one of the most vulnerable times, humiliating times in David's life, the Bible says he pretended to be insane in their presence. While he was in their hands, he acted like a madman, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down his beard. Achish said to his servants, look at the man, he is insane. Literally, they thought David was out of his mind. And just consider that he was willing to let himself look like that with such humiliation because he was afraid he would be found and discovered. And they wanted to just kind of get rid of him. He says, why bring him to me? Am I so short of madmen that you have to bring this fellow here to carry on like this in front of me? Must this man come into my house? So he left there and he escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. That's chapter 22. And all those who were in distress or in debt or discontented gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men with him. Well, what a motley crew of people. 400 men, the Bible says, discontented, distressed, or in debt. And they became his military. You know, again, God uses what he will, but he always gets the glory. And David became a tremendous fighter. We know that. He shed a lot of blood. But he was careful to still keep trying to flee to the heart of God. When I read this passage, I'm going to open up as one of the chapters we read this week, Psalm 34, and just point out a couple of things to you, because you think about him being in his low moment. And somehow in the midst of this, he writes these words, I will extol the Lord at all times. His praise will always be on my lips. He says in verse 4, I sought the Lord, and he answered me, and he delivered me from all my fears. Do you see that? Here you read back in 1 Samuel 21, the account of David feeling fear, feeling fearful. And yet he prayed to God, and God delivered him. Notice this, he said, those who look to him are radiant. Their faces are never covered with shame. I love this verse. He says, this poor man called, and the Lord heard him, and he saved him out of all his troubles. Taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the one who takes refuge in him. Maybe you need this verse this week. Psalm 34:18, the Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. The righteous person may have many troubles, but the Lord delivers him from them all. Do you hear this? This comes from the experience of a man who knew what it was like to walk through great distress and darkness, but yet he found God there. And I think that's the heart of every believer, that when we feel low, that we're trying to find God in the middle of it all. And he will be found. And let these words from these Psalms speak to you and fill your heart with encouragement. Read further on, Psalm 27. I mean, what a line this is. You can memorize these verses. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is a stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? He has this promise, verses 13 and 14. I remain confident of this, that I will see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and take heart. Wait for the Lord. I mean, we need to tell ourselves these truths. Wait on the Lord. And when David was saying that, he was doing it at a time when his hope truly was in God. And whatever he was walking through, he knew one day the sun's going to shine. God's going to come through. He'll be delivered, and God will be vindicated, and he would bless the name of the Lord. Let these Psalms fill your life and center them in the real context of a real man who walked through real anguish. God only uses real people in the Bible. It's all he has to work with. And if you're a real person, like I am, there's not an emotion that you have felt that God doesn't have something to connect with your heart in these great books of in this great book of Psalms. Finally, 1 Chronicles. We're going to start reading some Chronicles because 1st and 2nd Chronicles parallel some of these earlier stories in the 1st and 2nd Samuel, and then some parallels. You think about 1st, 2nd Kings. And we believe Chronicles, 1st Chronicles, again, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, we have that division in our English translation, but originally would not have had that division. Was probably written some 400 years later after all of this. And we believe the best case scenario, likelihood, is that they were written during the post-exilic period. That means that after God's people were exiled off the land, the Assyrians and the Babylonians destroyed God's people, the Medes, the Persians, that God was letting them come back, and during that period of the rebuilding of the temple and the rebuilding of the walls, the reconstituting of the land, that God gave them this great book. And so some of the stories metaphor this time period, which is why we'll read increasingly not just Samuel, but also Chronicles. So keep that in mind. Written, think of it like this, like the Gospels in the New Testament. There are 4 of them, but they're all speaking of the same time period. Same thing here with some of these historical books. 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, written at different times, and they have different purposes, and more on that as we pick up 1st Chronicles later. But for now, let these stories of David throughout the heart of this great book, 1 Samuel, resonate with you and lift your heart up to God. Let the Word come alive in your life, and Lord willing, we will see you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Let Life Begin podcast with Dr. Dunn. For more content, follow us on social media platforms and on Spotify. Thank you again for listening.